I'm here today with the major junior expert across Canada. He's located in, I believe, was it Newmarket, Ontario?
Toronto right now. For the purposes of this interview, we're hanging out in Toronto today.
Toronto, Ontario, but he gets out to the west actually quite a bit. That's, of course, Sportsnet's Sam Cosentino. Sam, how has your summer been now that we're getting into fall?
You know what, Zach? I've been really lucky. Our company's been unbelievable in terms of how they've dealt with us. We've gone through some structural changes, behind the scenes stuff. But by all accounts, they've done an amazing job keeping our people informed, keeping them safe, yet still being able to work. In terms of me personally, hanging out with the family every day, it's been great. Been golfing a little bit more than I ever have. Usually that time's taken up with Memorial Cup and the draft and the combine. So obviously that stuff didn't happen. So trying to get the handicap to a manageable level where I can still win a few bucks and still play pretty good.
Well, what's a manageable level for Sam Cosentino?
Well, I'd like to be at about a 10. I'm at an 11 right now, and I'm hoping by November I can get to a 10.
That's a pretty good little score.
Not
You could win a
bad.
couple tournaments with that. That's not too bad.
Yeah, not too bad.
Well, Sam, the biggest day or the biggest couple days of your year coming up pretty quick here, the NHL Draft. How have you been preparing for this draft? Obviously going to be unique, going to be online. And what do you think fans can expect from a fan experience standpoint?
Well, in terms of the preparation, it's kind of a year-long thing, and it's ramped up a lot, obviously, over the last 4 to 5 weeks. Once we had some definition on when the dates were going to be, and the draft lottery was kind of a cool thing, and then the second phase I thought was really neat how that all played out. But basically, you take your in-person viewings, then you take whatever video that you can get, especially those players in Europe that I don't get to see or haven't seen. Then you talk to your network of scouts, and you kind of just put it all into a bowl and mix it up, and that's kind of how I come up with my list. So I'm really lucky that in this job in particular, I've been able to forge a lot of relationships right across the CHL, the 60 teams. I feel comfortable calling anyone from any of the 60 teams, across the country and into the United States, as well as having called so many games and trying to get to as many games as possible. I've been able to forge a lot of relationships in the NHL scouting community, and I'm really excited about that. I'm really thankful for that. I'm really appreciative of the support that they offer, knowing that, I'm trying to get out there as much as I can, but I don't have budgets to get to Europe and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how the list comes together. In terms of the fan experience that we're hoping to provide from Sportsnet is we'll be working in conjunction with the NHL Network in Secaucus, New Jersey, where Bill Daly will be there. He'll make the pick. They will have someone interview the player or someone with the team. Meanwhile, we'll throw it back to our Sportsnet studios. Myself, Brian Burke, Jeff Merrick, and Elliot Friedman will be kind of handling the duties from there. And hopefully we're just able to provide some as best information as possible. The one thing, Zach, that we like to try and do is really fill in some background information. I mean, I think you can watch a highlight pack of a player and it's highlights, so they're going to be good things that you're seeing. But everyone's seeing goals and assists and really nice plays, saves, that sort of thing. But we try and dig in a little bit and try and offer a little bit of a different perspective in terms of what the player has to offer in the background. So we're going to be looking to do a lot of that.
Let's talk about a couple of those players and what they might have to offer, specifically from the Western Hockey League. And I'll start in Kamloops, where we have two players that could be very high picks. The first of which is Connor Zary, who tore up the Western Hockey League this year with the Kamloops Blazers. They look like a team that next year could compete for Memorial Cup. So where do you see Connor going in this year's draft? And more importantly, how do you think his game translates to the professional level?
Yeah, you know what, Zach? I have high praise for Connor. Having met him a couple of times, spent some time with him at the Prospects game, and then a real appreciation for the game that he brings to the table. By the way, he was really good in that Prospects game. But, here's a guy whose game will translate likely because he's a good two-way player, and he's a guy who seems to really thrive when the spotlight's on him. When the pressure's on, he seems to be able to perform really well in those types of situations. No issues with the skating whatsoever. Good puck handler, plays that in-tight game that we're seeing a lot in the National Hockey League, shoots the puck extremely well, and has really had a main role, even going back to his 16-year-old year, playing in Kamloops. So that doesn't happen very often. But I'm a huge fan of the player. I'm a huge fan of the person. I think for Connor, though, it kind of goes back to the end of the year previous to this, where down the stretch, Kamloops had to win some games, and he was being relied on as a key guy to do that, taking some key face-offs and scoring some big goals. And I think that helped him springboard into the offseason. Obviously, he had a good offseason there. And, as you say, he lit it up this year. I think the one thing I'd say about Connor, from a scouting community perspective, is I think he exceeded a lot of people's expectations in terms of his offensive output. And that's what put him, for me, in the range of probably 20 and above.
Well, his teammate, who is also another young player that's expected to do a lot, he's the WHL Academic Player of the Year. That's goaltender Dylan Garand. Scouting goalies in the NHL is probably the biggest question mark. You never know who's going to turn out. I mean, you look at Jack Campbell, who I believe went 11th overall in his draft year, and he's just now establishing himself as a backup goalie in the NHL. So where do you think Dylan is going to go in this draft, and who is somebody that we could compare his game to currently on the NHL level?
So when I look at Dylan, it's the same sort of thing as Connor. You have to really go back to the end of the year 2 years ago when Dylan Ferguson got hurt in Kamloops, and automatically here as a 16-year-old kid, Garand was thrown into the fire, and he was absolutely brilliant. Helped get them, I think it was 7 games down the stretch. They had to either win or get points in all of them, which they did. They go into the 1-game playoff. He's brilliant in that game, and that elevates Kamloops into the playoffs. So really, really cool situation for him there. And then to go into the next year in the same way as Connor did, where you have that confidence that you can play, not only hang in the league, but hang in high-pressure situations. And then he comes back last year, again, another guy who goes to the prospects game. But he's a really serious young man, so it's easy to see why he was able to win the Academic Player of the Year. I think everything he does, he kind of jumps right into, and he really takes it seriously. So everything that I understand about the young man and that he is into the game of hockey. I'm sure he's one of those guys who's probably a pool guy or a fantasy guy, or one of those guys who would look across the WHL and he'd be able to tell you, oh yeah, I know this guy, or I played against that guy, or I know what the top 10 in scores looks like. I know who the top 10 save percentage guys are that I'm up against in the league. So he's into it, man. And I love that about him. He seems like he's a real hockey nut. In terms of his game, he has a nice blend of athleticism, control, I think being a little bit on the smaller side when it comes to what we're seeing in the National Hockey League these days. You have to be able to kind of get outside of your comfort zone a little bit. You have to be aggressive. You have to get out, play the top of the crease, be aggressive on shooters as somewhat of a smaller guy. And so I think he has the ability to do that. So I guess if I look at him, he's maybe not quite as dynamic as what a Marc-Andre Fleury would be. But in terms of being able to have that athleticism, a guy who's serious about his craft, although Marc-Andre Fleury before games and maybe after games, Dylan, I think, is a more serious guy than that. But in terms of his ability to have success, I think in size and that sort of thing, I think Marc-Andre Fleury would be a guy that I would look at as being comparable to where Dylan is.
Well, there's no pressure on him now. Marc-Andre Fleury only went first overall in his draft year. But, when you talked about Dylan there, you were talking about he's dynamic, he's locked in, he knows what he needs to do. And looking at your career, you've been that same type of person. I mean, you've not only been the prospects expert for Sportsnet for countless years now, but you've also been a play-by-play guy for the Montreal Expos, and you've had Blue Jays Central. So how do you think your experience that still exists in baseball helps you in your current role ranking these draft prospects?
Well, I think when you go back and look at baseball, it's really difficult to kind of break into the circles of people there. And so for a lot of time, I worked in the visiting clubhouse, and you had no choice but to make relationships. And then in '96, I worked as an assistant equipment manager with the Blue Jays before getting into the broadcast stuff in '02. And again, you're kind of forced to grow up. You're kind of forced to make relationships. You're put in some, at times, uncomfortable situations. And so when I got on to being the kind of the prospects guy for Sportsnet, it was really just about relationship building. And I think a lot of those experiences in the past and trying to break through some of the tough exterior that baseball people generally have really helps you to create relationships, an NHL scout, and go up there and say hi and, hey, what do you think about this guy? And really it just kind of builds from there. And there are a lot of guys now that, that are in my phone that I can call quickly. And, when you're doing mock drafts and rankings and you just want to corroborate an opinion, or maybe you're in a position where you haven't seen a player. And so you can lean on those guys to do that. So I'm really thankful for that. But I think it really goes back to kind of going from a boy to a man a lot quicker than most people, because I was in a lot of situations with a lot of adult people, not older people, but adults, when it comes to being around the game of baseball. So I think those experiences definitely have helped basically in the relationship building aspect of what I do now.
And building relationships is so important. As you know, baseball is such an insular group, and hockey's in some way and a lot is the same.
It can be.
Yeah. You know, the joke we say is there's no nepotism in hockey. But, you know, when you talk about relationships and how important those are, when you look at a guy in Prince Albert like Ozzy Weisblatt, you talk about relationships, that might be a name that we hear a lot more, because he also has a younger brother that's going to be entering the Western League this year. But what does Ozzy do? He's projected late first, early second right now. What about his game has really improved since he's gotten to Prince Albert?
Well, it's his work ethic, his energy, his compete. Those are the things that stick out with him automatically. And then as you continue to watch the player, you understand that there's a really good skill set there. The ability to get the shot off in a hurry, good quick release. He can beat you going wide. He has no problem going to the middle of the ice. What's really cool about his story is the adversity of growing up, basically being raised by his mom, 3 brothers and a sister, I believe. I've watched Orca play back some games with Calgary, and Oasis is coming on the scene here pretty soon. And so when it comes to Ozzy, what's really cool about him is he played a key role on a WHL championship team at 16 years old. That doesn't happen very often. A lot of times those guys are at the back of the bus. They're fighting to either get in the lineup or fighting for fourth line minutes. But because of his energy, his passion, his drive, and his skill, it allowed Mark Habscheid to play him as a third line guy. And so that's where he really jumped off the page for me. And then you come back this year, you're given more responsibility, you're given some more of those high leverage minutes and power play time that you weren't able to take advantage of as a youngster. And then you capitalize on those situations and on those opportunities, and it helps your growth as a player. So when I look at the adversity, with his mom and being deaf and having to communicate through sign language, and maybe going through some humble beginnings, growing up and having to get some help from other families in his minor hockey career. And I combine that with what I actually see and having met the young man, I think that's an awesome story. I don't know if he's right in that mix at the end of the first round and into the second, but he's not a guy that I'd sleep on for too long, because I think people like that are extremely driven, yet they have all the capabilities as a player to go along with that drive. And that's what makes him so impressive for me.
And he just keeps getting better too. Another player on his team who's most likely going to be a top 15 pick would be Caden Gooley, brother of Brendan Gooley. Prince Albert is turning back into a hockey hotbed for these first round picks. And, Mark Habscheid, they won the championship last year. They're technically still the reigning champions of the Western Hockey League. So he'll go into the draft with that as well. Sam, you're based in Ontario, but you made it out to the West on several occasions. You've been around our league quite a bit. You've called games all over the Western Hockey League, including, I'm sure, in buildings that don't have teams anymore. The clubs have moved on. Yeah. But in your travels, where's your favorite place to go call a game or to go watch a game in the Western Hockey League?
Well, I like Kelowna. I mean, just the city. The Hamiltons have always treated us well whenever we've gone in there, and going back to the days of even when Abby was there back in 2004 through to Jeff Trude, who's still someone I call a close friend today, and obviously Ryan Husk has done amazing things as an assistant in Calgary, and it's really carried on. Got to know Adam Foote there for a short period of time, but Chris Millette is a guy who has kind of transitioned through a few of those guys who now has the opportunity to run his own show. So from a coaching and management perspective, we always get treated extremely well going in there. I mean, how can you not like the setup where you stay in the hotel right across from the rink? Obviously, you got the mountains close by. I've brought my family out skiing to Big White in each of the last few years. There's golf there. I'm a big wine guy, so the wineries are there. So it's not just, going in there and going to watch a hockey game, but allows you to kind of live a human life a little bit too every time you go to Kelowna. So really sucked that we missed the 2 weeks there for the Memorial Cup this year. But I have so much respect for the organization, the way it's been run, all the players that they've produced in the National Hockey League. So getting out there to see a game for me is probably my favorite place in the Western Hockey League. Having said that, Victoria is a pretty close second, and for a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah, I lived in Victoria for a couple of years when I was going to university. It is a great place to live. And it's funny, you picked two of the most temperate places in the Western Hockey League as your favorite place to go.
Yeah.
Sam, last player I'd like to ask you about here. This guy, he's been a same kind of situation as Ozzy Weisblatt, where at 16, he was asked to do probably more than most 16-year-olds do. And then at 17, really came into his own on a very good team. And that's Jake Neighbors from the Edmonton Oil Kings. Where do you see Jake progressing? And, let's just look at his next 2 years. Is this a guy that next season has an opportunity to play for Team Canada at the World Juniors?
Well, I think so. And when, it's funny that we're talking about Ozzy Weisblatt and Jake Neighbors. Those guys are best of buddies. In fact, it was Jake who took it upon himself to learn sign language so that he can communicate well with the Weisblatt family. And I think that's such a cool story for a young man to take that upon himself. So I really, really am impressed by that alone. That's kind of the starting point for me. But I had a chance to sit down with Jake earlier in the year. And I was so impressed with the young man because the topic of coming from a divorced family came up, and it wasn't something he shied away from. And I felt that I was okay to ask those questions because I come from a family that's like that. And Jake was really open and honest about it and how he's kind of navigated through that, which can be a very difficult thing for kids at times. So that's just all the background stuff that we had talked about before. Now, getting into the player, what I think has helped him a lot is when you look at the playoffs and the heaviness of what the playoffs have offered this year in the National Hockey League, Jake Neighbors is a guy who is right up that alley. He wants to get under your skin. He wants to throw the body. By the way, you don't sleep on his skill because he'll score. So you put all those attributes together. You look at the way the game's being played in the playoffs and you say, all right, I can see this happening. What's important to know about that type of skill set is the fact that if for whatever reason you're in the National Hockey League, you're bound to go through slumps, you're bound to get pushed up and down in the lineup. The fact is Jake has basically the backup plan so that if he can't play in your top six and he's not going to be a 20 or 30 goal guy, how is it that he's still going to impact your team? Well, you can play him on the third line. You can play him on a fourth line. He'll give you some PP2 options if he's not quite good enough to play in your first power play. And I think he's got some penalty killing in his game as well because he's a smart player. So the fallback is if you draft him as a National Hockey League, you're saying, of course, we want his upside to be a top six guy, a top two line guy. But we know that if that doesn't pan out, he's going to sit comfortably on our third line. He's going to give us really good energy minutes. He's going to go in and be a pain in the rear end against the opponent. And that's an awesome fallback position to have.
I mean, if I'm Jake Neighbors listening to that, I'm even more excited about the draft now. I'm learning about myself. No, that's awesome. Well, Sam, I'll give you a chance here at the end, our last question, to pat yourself on the back. I talked to Ryan Kennedy last week, who was obviously with the Hockey News, and I asked him, you've been doing this for so long, you've seen so many players, but I'm sure there's one player that you said, I really think this guy is going to be a lot better than what people have him projected to be right now. And Ryan Kennedy said, well, when I saw Anthony Cirelli play for the first time, I said, this guy, there's something special. So do you have a guy that you saw play and you just thought, there's something here and I think this guy's going to do great things?
Well, you know what? You go back to Braden Point's days, and it's funny because, his jersey was down to his knees, and he looked like the guy who should have been playing at the intermission, the kid who should have been playing at the intermission, rather than the guy who was playing, the 20 minutes of the game. So he'd be one guy. Andre Palat, oddly enough, is another guy. I watched him in Drummondville quite a bit, and I thought, wow, this guy's got something here. But I think the one guy that I really felt very strongly about is actually a Russian. Artemi Panarin played in our Canada-Russia series that we traditionally have in November, and he was skinny as a rake in his draft year. And he kind of disappeared. He went back. He played in the KHL for a little while, then obviously showed up in Chicago. We know what he did there. You're looking at what he's done this year, unbelievable things, with the Rangers now, through Columbus and whatnot. But he's a guy that I thought to myself, wow, he's super smart. He's got unbelievable skill. For a thin guy, he shoots at a ton. So he's one guy that I would say I was pretty proud to feel that I was confident that he was going to be a good National Hockey League player. It just took a little longer than expected.
Yeah, he took a couple extra stops there in Russia. The bus breaks down every once in a while.
That's it.
Oh, Sam, thanks again so much for doing this. Have a great rest of your week, and best of luck once the NHL draft gets going.
Yeah, awesome, Zach. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Hope to be out there soon calling games, man. I miss it.